A lot of fans of The Lion King give Simba all the credit when it comes to saving the Pride Lands, but few acknowledge the essential role that Nala played in saving their ancestral homeland. If it wasn't for her decision to leave Pride Rock when all the other lionesses stayed under Scar's rule, Simba might have never learned about his uncle's tyranny. But have you ever wondered why it took so long for Nala to leave the Pride Lands? Well, sometimes it's hard to leave behind something, or in this case, some place, that means a whole lot to you. This means that whatever it was that Scar did to force Nala's paw must have been pretty disturbing. Let's check it out. For starters, it was probably a little bit easier for Nala to finally leave the Pride Lands once they became the tattered, desolate wasteland that Scar and his hyenas turned it into. I mean, before Scar became the king in the first movie, the Pride Lands were depicted as a lush landscape that was full of flora and fauna living together in harmony. It was an ecosystem that was built on the predators and their prey all working together, living and dying in a fragile balance. I'm sure I don't have to remind you of the importance of the circle of life. In The Lion King, Disney showed us that the lions were clearly smart about how they handled their food situation. They made sure not to overhunt so that the antelopes, gazelles, and other animals could continue to thrive alongside them. This provided the lions with a nearly endless food supply while also allowing the Pride Lands to stay beautiful and well maintained by the grazing herbivores and other wildlife that inhabited it. That being said, all codes of conduct went out the window as soon as Scar allowed the greedy hyenas into the Pride Lands, and that led to a situation that made it much easier for Nala to step away than when Mufasa was in charge and the land was well taken care of. You see, in The Lion King, following Mufasa's death, Scar knew that he could convince the lionesses that he was the rightful heir, but just in case, he needed a backup plan, which is where his hyena army came into play. He used the hyenas to oppress the lionesses of Pride Rock to make sure that they all fell in line, and in return, the hyenas were given free range of the Pride Lands. As you saw from the movie, in the short time that Simba was away from Pride Rock, the entire surrounding area went from being bright, colorful, and filled with life to being dark, gray, and barren. After seeing her home like that, it probably made Nala's decision to leave the Pride Lands much easier. She knew that their home was almost gone due to the hyenas' destruction, and as a last-ditch effort to save her family, the young lioness went out on her own in search of something better. But if Nala saw that the Pride Lands were becoming a barren wasteland, why did it take her so long to actually leave it? For a group of lionesses like Nala and Sarabi's pride, leaving the home of their ancestors would be something that was surely easier said than done. It wasn't like they were just roaming through the area and happened to stop at the Pride Lands for a temporary rest. No, according to The Lion King and books that were centered in the same universe, the Pride Lands had belonged to Simba's family for quite a long time. It's not clear exactly how many generations of lions ruled over the Pride Lands before Simba, but according to the novels and shows based on The Lion King, it's been many. You can date their lineage in the Pride Lands as far back or even further as Askari, an old royal lion who was actually the founder of the Lion Guard. The Lion Guard was formed many generations before Mufasa and was created specifically to protect the Pride Lands, implying that the land had been with their family for some time. In other words, the Pride Lands were their ancestral home, which made it particularly hard for the lionesses to leave when Scar took over. Not to mention that Scar was technically the rightful heir to the throne, or at least that's what they all believed since he lied to them. When Scar returned to Pride Rock with the grave news that their king was dead in the gorge, he embellished the truth and went on to say that Simba was dead as well. In doing so, he basically crowned himself the king since he was technically next in line for the throne, something that none of the other lions could really argue against. So, with Scar as the supposed true king of Pride Rock and the land being their ancestral home, the lionesses likely found no reason to just up and abandon the Pride Lands. That is, until Nala finally stepped up and went out on her own with the sole intention of saving her family from Scar and the hyenas. She wasn't alone either. One of my favorite moments in The Lion King was when Sarabi finally spoke out to Scar and informed him that all of the herds had moved on and that soon they would be forced to leave the Pride Lands in search of food in order to survive. This was a powerful moment because it showed that even though the Pride Lands were their ancestral home and they didn't want to leave it, Scar and his hyenas had ruined it so much that they literally didn't have a choice. But that couldn't have been the only reason that Nala finally went out on her own. So what was it that finally pushed Nala over the edge and made her feel like she had no other choice but to leave the Pride Lands for herself and her family? When it comes down to it, it was probably the madness of King Scar that pushed her over the edge, and that's in reference to his deteriorating mindset as well as a song that was cut from the final movie. The song was called The Madness of King Scar, and after being cut from the final version of the movie, it eventually made its way into the Broadway musical. Be warned, it's honestly one of the creepiest songs that any Disney villain has ever belted out, and that includes Frollo's rendition of Hellfire. The Madness of King Scar came about as the lion began to wonder if he was truly respected as the king of the pride. He couldn't help but feel as though he hadn't been accepted by the lionesses. In the song, he describes his desire to be loved, and he also mentions mentions that the memories of his late brother still haunt him, even though Scar was the one who killed Mufasa in the first place. And while Zazu did his best to tell Scar why he could never live up to Mufasa, Scar heard one line that the bird sang and latched onto it. Zazu mentioned that Scar didn't have a family of his own, and just like that, Scar became obsessed with leaving behind a legacy. In his head, Scar needed two things to become the true king of the Pride. He needed a queen and a long line of children to carry on his legacy after his time had come. To make things worse though, as he's latching on to this idea of finding a queen to have cubs with, a familiar lioness walked into his den. Scar laid eyes on Nala and then became the creepiest dude in the whole world. While Nala showed up in the deleted scene to speak with Scar about possibly changing his ways in order to save the Pride Lands, the devious king decided to basically force himself on the lioness. He approached her and explained what he wanted from her, and of course Nala wasn't into that. But as she tried to walk away from Scar, he basically backed her into a corner and wasn't going to take no for an answer. Thankfully, Nala wasn't backing down either, and according to the deleted scene, she smacked Scar and got away from him. Scar continued to pursue her though, and even gave her an ultimatum. The lion explained to Nala that he was the king and basically what he said goes. His exact words in the deleted scene were, "You really have no choice. One way or another, I always get what I want." He then continued by saying, "Either be my queen or be forever banished from the Pride Lands." Eventually, the rest of the lionesses got involved and tried to stop the king from pushing himself onto Nala. It was then when Scar's true intentions were revealed. Once the Pride had finally stood up to Scar, he saw it as treason and promptly summoned his hyena army to silence their uprising. In that moment, the Pride saw that Scar no longer cared whether or not they respected him, but instead was prepared to rule with an iron fist regardless. And when all was said and done, Nala finally knew where she stood within the Pride and that she needed to do anything she could to save them from Scar's wrath, even if that meant leaving her home. But when the time came, would Nala have the blessing of the Pride to go where she needed to go? It certainly seems like she did, at least according to the Broadway musical. In the musical adaptation of The Lion King, one of the added songs actually expressed exactly how the Pride felt about Nala leaving to find either a safe passage for the lions to leave the Pride Lands or someone to help them regain their home. The song was called Shadowlands, and it expressed how Nala was feeling at the time. She knew that her home was dying and she needed to do something, but the thought of leaving her ancestral birthplace was almost too much to bear. In the song, the Pride lets Nala know that it's okay for her to leave. They wish her the best, and she even received a blessing from Rafiki before she went out on her own. And as you know, that blessing ultimately worked, because when Nala returned, she would come back with the true king of Pride Rock, Simba. With that, the lionesses were finally free from Scar and the hyena's tyranny, and over time, the Pride Lands were restored to their harmonious original beauty. What do you think though? If Nala had left the Pride Lands sooner, would she have been able to bring Simba back to save them? Or do you think that it was necessary for that time to pass so that he could grow stronger and all the lionesses could learn what they were truly fighting for? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below.